Good afternoon, everyone. You are very welcome to the Safeguarding Irish Communities Against Nitazenes webinar. The panel will be delighted to receive any questions you may have. Please use the Q&A feature located at the bottom of your PC laptop screen. If you are using an iPad, you will find this feature located at the top of your screen. Without further ado, I will now hand you over to your host for today, McCormack, Detective Superintendent, Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for attending. My name is McCormack. I'm Detective Superintendent in the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, and I head up the National Drug Strategy Office. Today's webinar, well, frontline service providers obviously have an important role in our response to managing synthetic opioids in the community. We're there to monitor the situation on the ground, to respond to protect the health of people using drugs. And these frontline services include Garda Síochána, obviously, homeless and addiction services, paramedics, hospitals, and volunteer and state agencies. Today we have speakers from home and abroad, demonstrating the power of interagency and indeed international collaboration. We have a representative from the EMCDDA, the leading authority on illicit drugs in the EU. We have a representative from Public Health Wales, 3 representatives from the HSE, and myself, showing that while the National Drug Strategy is indeed health-led, the response is not health only. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Rachel Christie, our first presenter. Now, Rachel is Principal Scientific Analysis working at the EMCDDA. She's working in the new drug sector for the last 10 years. She's responsible for the day-to-day operation of the early warning system, which I think most of our presenters here today feed into. She's a chemist with an undergraduate degree in forensic and environmental chemistry and completed her PhD in the analysis, synthesis and characterization of new psychoactive substances in 2014. Today, she's presenting on the global and EU context relating to the emergence of synthetic opioids and the latest information from the EMCDDA early warning system. Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shane. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. And hopefully now that is in presenter mode. And you can see the presentation okay.
Rachel, if you wouldn't mind, could you try resharing that again, please? Oh,
okay,
there it is now.
There
no, we have it.
Right,
Thank you.
A bit slow. Sorry on our side. Okay, great. So before I start, I'd just like to thank Nikki, Eamon, and Quiva for organising this very timely and important webinar on the topic of nitazenes, and for inviting me to be able to share with you an overview of what is known about nitazenes from the EU perspective. So during this presentation, we're going to look at nitazenes through 3 broad lenses, covering their emergence, the response mechanisms that are available and have been used at EU level, and finally, the preparedness toolkit that will be needed to prepare for and to respond to possible increases in nitazene availability and potentially associated harms. Nitazenes, also known as benzimidazoles, are potent synthetic opioids. They were originally developed in the mid-1950s as an attempt to develop better and safer opioids. While several benzimidazoles were in fact patented, notably these attempts did not result in any marketed analgesic medicines. Similar to other types of opioid analgesics such as morphine and fentanyl, nitazenes act on the mu-opioid receptors. Many are at least as potent as fentanyl, some are more potent. And the effects of nitazenes share similarities with fentanyl and other opioid analgesics. Those acute effects can include euphoria, relaxation, analgesia, sedation, bradycardia, hypothermia, respiratory depression. Importantly, respiratory depression, if left untreated, can lead to respiratory arrest and death. And this risk can be exacerbated by the use of other central nervous system depressants. And as we're going to hear later on during the course of this webinar, the timely administration of naloxone has been shown to be effective in reversing respiratory depression. Between the mid-1960s and the mid-2000s, there were occasional reports regarding the nitazene, ethanitazene. But nitazenes really first emerged in the drug market in 2019. This histogram here highlights the emergence of nitazenes as a response to the introduction of generic control measures for fentanyl derivatives, also known as fentanyls, in China in May 2019. And we're going to come back to this histogram in a little bit more detail in a later slide. But I think it's important at this point to take a minute to look more closely at the chemical scaffolds of benzimidazole and fentanyl, because we've mentioned these in the first initial slides. Examples of better known nitazenes and fentanyls, etonitazene and carfentanil, are illustrated here on the right-hand side of the slide, just for additional illustrative and contextual purposes. As you see here on the left-hand side of the slide, benzimidazole is structurally unrelated to fentanyl. However, what's important here is that small structural modifications to both scaffolds can and has produced a series of analogous substances within both the nitazene and fentanyl categories. If you see here on the benzimidazole scaffold, we have small, as I said, small modifications at the OR1, OR2, and OR3 groups, just generally to mention that by changing and adding modifications here, for example, changing the length of the alkyl chain, alkoxy chain, the type of parabenzyl substituent, and the presence of a 5-nitro group all affect the potency of these compounds. And interestingly, a recent paper by Glafelter and his colleagues on the in vitro and in vivo effects of nitazene analogues were examined and compared to morphine and fentanyl. And it was reported that through the course of the analysis done in that paper, that the alkoxy chain, so that chain branch, had a significant influence on potency. So we're still learning regarding these particular substances. So to reiterate that point on the impact of small modifications, these are the complete range of structures of all the 16 nitazenes that the EMCDDA is currently monitoring. The nitazene protonitazepine, also known as N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene, is highlighted here amongst all the other nitazenes, as this is the substance that will be mentioned later with particular reference to the most recent outbreaks of overdoses in Ireland. The first nitazene to have emerged on the EU drug market was isotoniazine in 2019. In 2020, 5 nitazenes were identified, followed by 3 in 2021, 1 in 2022, and 6 in 2023. So 2023 represented the highest number of nitazenes notified in a single year. And at this point, nitazenes make up 20% of the total number of opioids that are monitored by the early warning system. As nitazenes have emerged, so too has published work in the academic literature, and through variations of sharing that information through online sharing, of information, particularly information on the analysis and identification of these substances at a global level. So that contributes really substantially to our greater understanding of this developing situation. And I just provide some examples here of some of the key and recent information that has become available, as I said, through the academic literature and through online information. We touched briefly on this histogram in a previous slide, and it illustrates the number of synthetic opioids identified for the first time in the EU since 2009. It's broken down by category. Other opioids, so not fentanyls or benzimidazoles, which are also referred to as nitazenes, are in dark blue. Fentanyls, in the slightly darker blue, begin appearing around 2012, and identifications of new fentanyls increase until 2019, when, as mentioned earlier, the generic control of fentanyls in China came into effect. From this point on, starting in 2019, we see the emergence of nitazenes. And since 2019, almost 3/4 of the 29 countries that report and are part of the early warning system, the EU early warning system network, have reported the identification of one or more nitazenes, and that includes Ireland. Our most recent seizure data from 2022 illustrates that just over 250 seizures of nitazenes, amounting to just over 3 kilograms of material in the form of tablets, capsules, and liquids have been seized. Most of the seizures relate to detections of protonitazene and metonitazene, and to a lesser extent, isotonitazene, etazine, and butanitazene. Also, just to mention that preliminary information from seizures and deaths reported in 2023 suggests that metonitazene and protonitazene continue to be the main nitazenes on the market. And also, I think it's important to highlight here that metonitazene and protonitazene were internationally controlled in 2023 under the 1961 UN Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs. When it comes to the manufacture, processing, and supply of nitazenes, the information is limited. What we can say is that information from law enforcement suggests that they are manufactured by companies in China and shipped to distributors and consumers in Europe by express mail and courier services. Furthermore, that distribution within Europe has been reported, particularly related to online sales. Reports mostly from customs seizures indicates a number of countries: France, Germany, Greece, the Netherlands, Poland, Spain, and the UK, as the current country of origin of consignments of nitazenes between 2020 and 2023. Furthermore, information from seizures and test purchases made in 2023 indicate France, Germany, and Poland as the country of origin. In October of 2023, the Metropolitan Police in the UK seized 150,000 tablets containing an unspecified nitazene in a sophisticated factory setup in East London, as you can see here in the images. It is suspected that those drugs were sold via the darknet or the dark web, using encrypted chat web applications and social media. Now, a worrying concern relates to the possible increase of fake opioid and benzodiazepine medicines containing nitazenes in Europe. In June of last year, Swedish customs seized 100 fake oxycodone tablets containing metonitazene, while in September, Portuguese police seized over 5,000 fake oxycodone tablets containing N-diazetyl isotonitazene, which was formally notified in last year as well. Moving on to October, police in the United Kingdom seized, as I mentioned already, approximately 150,000 oxycodone tablets containing nitazenes. And by November, Finnish police had seized fake Subutex or buprenorphine tablets containing metonitazene, and Swedish customs had seized more than 3,000 fake OxyContin tablets containing metonitazene. Those tablets, as you can see in the picture below on at the far right-hand side of the slide, were found in a Polish taxi coming off a ferry in Karlskrona. You can see the illustrations of these detections in the images below. And when we look into more recent times, in December, the health authorities in the UK issued an alert due to an increase in fake benzodiazepine medicines containing nitazene. And in 2024, so our most recent kind of information to date regards Finnish police seizing 1,000 fake Subutex tablets containing metonitazene, as you can see here in the image below. Since 2022, there's also been an increase in reports of nitazene detections and, importantly, an increase in deaths where nitazenes have been identified. Specifically in 2022, 43 deaths with nitazenes have occurred in 5 countries, and 4 nitazenes were involved in those cases. They were protonitazene, metonitazene, isotonitazene, and etazine. And the majority of these deaths occurred in the second half of 2022. And what you can see here is that a number of the same substances, same nitazenes, are being mentioned. Localized outbreaks of poisonings caused by nitazenes missold as heroin were also reported during 2023 by France and Ireland. In France, this outbreak occurred in Montpellier in February and March. While it was limited in size, it involved at least 4 non-fatal poisonings and at least 1 death. 2 collected samples were then analysed and found to contain isotonitazene. One of those was missold as Chinese heroin, the other as heroin. In the case of Ireland, I'm not going to go into massive detail here because I know it's going to be addressed very well during the course of the webinar. Just to mention that in this case, The outbreaks occurred in Dublin in November and Cork in December. These were more extensive than the outbreak that I just mentioned in France. And the outbreaks were suspected to have involved 57 and 8 non-fatal poisonings in Dublin and Cork, respectively. Those outbreaks were linked to the use of a brown powder sold as heroin, and subsequent analysis of seized samples related to the Dublin outbreak identified that nitazene that I highlighted earlier, protonitazene. Multiple widespread outbreaks of poisonings have been recorded in the UK involving a number of different nitazenes. In this case, at least 65 deaths with confirmed exposure to nitazenes have been recorded since June, and many deaths appear to be related to heroin use, with one or more nitazenes being directly mixed with heroin by different suppliers. These are different to the outbreaks in France and Ireland, where nitazene did not contain any heroin, and fake medicines, particularly oxycodone, diazepam, and alprazolam, containing nitazenes have also been reported. Looking to other developments and signals of concern regarding nitazenes, 2021 saw the emergence of trank dope, so opioids mixed with the sedative and analgesic xylazine. Those opioids, including nitazenes mixed with xylazine, have been detected in 4 countries in the early warning system network, most of those in Estonia and Latvia, and that includes in deaths and residue analysed from used injecting equipment. In 2022, we then saw the emergence of benzodope, so opioids mixed with new benzodiazepines, for example, bromozolam. Seizures again reported by Estonia and Latvia, and in both countries the same mixtures have been identified in residues analysed from used syringes. So moving to responses, isotoniazine provides a useful illustration of the timeline and the range of responses at EU level to this particular nitazene. Responses to new psychoactive substances such as nitazenes begin with a detection and the analytical identification of a new substance in the EU. Once a new substance has been analytically confirmed and reported to the EMCDDA, we can then start monitoring the substance following the issuing of a formal notification, the example of which you can see on the left-hand side of the screen here. A formal notification is issued to our early warning system network and contains all of the known and available information on that substance, including chemical, pharmacological, and toxicological information. This formal notification is disseminated to the national focal points in our network to a range of actors within those national networks, such as law enforcement, hospitals, poison centres, forensic and toxicological laboratories, and so forth. As we monitor the substance, more information can become available and is constantly reviewed by the team here. In some cases where an increase in identifications and potential risks or harms associated with a substance become known to us, we may decide to inform our network through a risk communication on that substance. In the case of isotoniazine, a risk communication was issued in early 2022 as a result of those reasons. We then continue to monitor reports of detections of that substance through the European database on new drugs, also known as EDND, and this is an example of one of our substance profiles for isotoniazine. This database is the main repository of all information and analytical data on NPS or new psychoactive substances in Europe. It's updated daily, and access is restricted to members of the early warning system network through their national focal points and other experts. Following a review of the information available on isotoniazine, a detailed investigation of the substance was carried out by the EMCDDA, and ultimately in May 2020, a risk assessment was conducted. Isotoniazine was subsequently controlled at EU level and later controlled at international level under the 1961 UN Single Convention. More generally, recent responses to the emergence of nitazenes in the EU have included the issuing of risk communications from the early warning system to our early warning system network in the form of advisories to our network. And you can see examples of those risk communications that were issued as early warning system advisories. And we alerted our network to, for instance, outbreaks of poisonings in France, the UK, and Ireland. Another part of the response to nitazenes at EU level has included placing individual nitazenes under intensive monitoring. So all new psychoactive substances, as I mentioned earlier, are monitored by the EMCDDA from the point of formal notification to our network. During the course of the monitoring, the EMCDDA may identify signals that suggest that a new psychoactive substance may pose severe public health or social risks. And those substances are then subjected to intensive monitoring so that we can better assess, monitor, and understand the risks that that substance may pose. So they are then placed on an intensive monitoring list and they're regularly reviewed. And just to mention that the nitazenes that are currently on that intensive monitoring list include protonitazepine, etomethazine, etonitazepipine, protonitazene, and so forth. Part of the response includes the idea that the substances, as I mentioned, need to be analytically identified. Forensic science is at the core of the EU early warning system. We monitor and respond to substances which have been analytically identified. Therefore, information sharing and the provision of analytical data and analytical libraries is an integral element of how we can respond to nitazenes. The EDND, and this is one part of the EDND where we house all of the analytical data, is another element of how we can respond to nitazenes. It contains the EDND contains analytical data on more than 1,000 new psychoactive substances. So it provides laboratories across our network with support in the identification of new and emerging substances. And this is just more information that we provide for analytical detection to those laboratories through the EDND. Another aspect of how we have been responding over the last few years is through having expert technical meetings on the topic of concern regarding new synthetic opioids and nitazenes, and through those avenues we develop a better understanding of the situation as it's developing, and we also share publicly information through our reports that we publish through the EMCDDA website. So anybody can access our reports. For example, our new psychoactive substances update from 2022 is available on the EMCDDA website, and that will contain a lot of the information regarding developing situations regarding NPS. So to come finally, because I'm getting close to the end of my time, just to mention on the preparedness toolkit. I've spoken a lot about the emergence and the responses, and preparedness is essentially a toolkit, and it requires a multifactorial kind of approach. This will be discussed in much more detail, and you'll see clear examples of this through the course of this webinar. But from our perspective, the key elements include early warning systems, a really strong emphasis on communication and information exchange and sharing, that the analytical resources and capabilities are sufficient to meet the demands of a newly emerging situation, such as what we're covering today. Obviously, the planning that is required around that, and what are the needs and maybe gaps in knowledge. And then finally, to mention, as I said at the start, the availability and use of naloxone, which I guess will be discussed in much more detail shortly. And thank you for your attention. Just to mention that this information and more detailed information is available on the EMCDDA website. And during 2024, as part of the European Drug Markets publication, we will have a specific module on the NPS market. So that's due out in 2024. So I would ask you to keep an eye out on the EMCDDA website. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Very interesting presentation. We're now going to go across to Dean Acreman. Dean is the project manager for the Trends in Substance Misuse and Harm Reduction within the Public Health Wales Health Protection Team, primarily involved in the management of the Welsh Emerging Drugs and Identification of Novel Substances Project, or WEDINOS program. This provides for the collection and testing of psychoactive substances, including novel combinations of substances, the profiling of substances' chemical structure, and the dissemination of pragmatic harm reduction advice. He's employed by Public Health Wales for the last 11 years. He has extensive experience working within the criminal justice system and in the field of substance misuse. He's interested in the trends in substance misuse on an international, national, and regional level. Dean, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, just sharing my screen. Yeah, so WEDINOS has just celebrated its 10th anniversary. We received our first sample at the start of October 2013. And since that time, we've now received and analysed just under 45,000 samples of substances. It is the Welsh Government's drug testing and harm reduction system. Is funded by Welsh Government, managed by Public Health Wales, and is primarily a collaboration between Public Health Wales, Cardiff University, and Cardiff and the Vale University Health Board. Although we do collate samples from a wide variety of different sources. Yeah, so it's a network unlike any other. It's an open access testing system for people residing within the UK. We receive samples coming in from the Welsh Ambulance Service, from Welsh emergency departments. We also receive samples from drug treatment centres, substance misuse services, housing and homelessness providers, alongside criminal justice services, nighttime economy, music festivals, and from individuals anonymously and independently outside of services. So hopefully what it gives us with the number of samples that we have is the power to be able to speak on several different types of drug markets, whether that be recreational drug use, problematic drug use that is causing acute adverse harms and hospitalizations, and individuals who are self-medicating. Utilising all those key stakeholders, it allows us to be more than just a drug testing service. Focusing on those consumer level samples, it's the National Drug Markets Trends and Threat Monitoring System, which enables us to talk in the way that we can. In terms of WEDINOS and nitazenes, which is what I'll focus on today, is what we've seen in terms of nitazenes coming into the sample, into WEDINOS. We received our first sample that contained a nitazene on the 14th of April 2021. It was an unknown white powder from Wakefield in England. Came in a bag found by a taxi driver in the back of their taxi. And upon analysis utilising ultra performance liquid chromatography QTOF, this sample was profiled as containing metanitazene. So that was the first one that we identified. Just to say that our UPLC QTOF uses a library of substances to enable us to rapidly identify contents and profile the contents of samples submitted to us. We have now purchased the known monitored nitazenes and added that to our reference library so that we'll be able to identify the known nitazenes as well. So we can rapidly respond to new identifications in the market. Since the 14th of April, we've now identified nitazenes in over 120 samples from across the United Kingdom. Although there's been that increase in the number of samples coming in, I do need to say that WEDINOS can't be used as a prevalence tool in terms of the prevalence of nitazenes within the drug market in the UK. It's a self-reporting system in that individuals have to want to submit their samples for analysis. And also we see localized responses. So where there's raised concern because of perhaps a cluster of overdoses, we do often see an increase in the number of samples that are provided from that locality as well. So it's a very proactive testing system in that sense also. Over time, the way that we've seen nitazenes come into the project has changed. Initially for us, from the first receipt of a sample to the end of 2022, oxycodone was the primary purchase intent that we were seeing these samples coming in. So out of the 37 samples profiled as containing a nitazene from April 2021 to the end of 22, 29 of those, so 78%, actually were submitted in the belief that they were oxycodone. The vast majority of those samples were in tablet format, We did see a variety of other purchase intents. Actually, one individual did intend to purchase etanitazene, and that was what that sample contained. There's some other outliers. We found it in a THC vape, but also within synthetic cannabinoids as well. But generally, up in that early period, the vast majority of identifications of nitazenes were in samples bought as oxycodone. That started to change in 2023. Sorry, there's a typo there. That should read July 2023. Oxycodone remained the most common purchase intent listed until July 2023. And at that time, we started to see diazepam appear as the purchase intent in samples that were profiled as containing these nitazenes. By November 2023, it was the most commonly stated purchase intent, up to 57%. You can see there the shift where oxycodone was almost at 80% in terms of purchase intent. It's fallen down now to 14%. But primarily, we were now seeing this within samples of diazepam. So that shift happened over the summer period of 2023, leading up and then till November of 23, where diazepam became the #1 purchase intent for coming into the project. We heard earlier about being found in benzodope. The vast majority of these samples purchased as diazepam upon analysis were profiled as containing bromazolam and metanitazene. So a designer benzodiazepine and a nitazene as well within them. That was a real concern for us because what we were seeing these samples coming in as was within blister packs. We were seeing them in packaging that would give you the sense that they were pharmaceutical products. You know, the boxes had the braille types on there, different print faces for the expiry date, the batch number, patient information sheets within there as well. Everything in terms of the visual inspection of that sample would tell you that it was a pharmaceutical product. Unfortunately, what we was finding was they contain nitazene. So we did some proactive work at the end of November and early December. We shared information with all our stakeholders, so drug services, the College for Emergency Medicines, the UK Drug Alert System, the National Crime Agency, as well as putting information out via social media that we were seeing these samples. We use the same tagline, are you getting what you think you're getting, as Dan 24/7 did, so that we could tie in with the information that was being provided by the Welsh National Drugs helpline. And we did proactive media and communication strategy at that time. So went out to printed media, online media, the BBC, ITV, and did some proactive media around this, highlighting the concern in relation to nitazenes being found in what people were purchasing as benzodiazepine. In terms of exposure, we had really good exposure within Wales. Unfortunately, we didn't get a huge amount of exposure on a UK-wide level because coincidentally on the same day, the NCA, the National Crime Agency, released their information relating to nitazene drug-related deaths. So coincidentally, it was at the same time and that took precedent across the board. But at least nitazenes were in the public forum at that time. We continue to provide information and promotion of naloxone, particularly amongst a group of non-opioid users. That was our main concern, you know, individuals buying these substances from online pharmacies or via the dark web, not accessing services, not engaging with services, expecting to consume a benzodiazepine and unknowingly actually consuming these very potent synthetic opioids. So we wanted to raise awareness of naloxone amongst those groups. And also within services, you know, if this is a group of individuals who are buying prescription medication online, perhaps there was an unwillingness to take something like the prenoxide preloaded injectable naloxone. So making sure that services had adequate supplies of the intranasal naloxone Nixoid within services to provide that option to a different type of using group. Then over the end of December into the new year, we started to see a change and an increase in the number of samples coming into WEDINOS that were purchased as heroin. Although we'd seen nitazenes in heroin previously, from November, particularly through December 23, there was an increased number of samples submitted as heroin. We had a cluster of fatal and non-fatal drug poisonings in Adamstown and Roath areas of Cardiff, particularly amongst heroin users. We were very fortunate that the South Wales Police and Gwent Joint Scientific Investigation Unit provided fast testing for samples found at scene and quantified the presence of nitazenes, and also we had rapid access to toxicology results as well, and nitazenes were identified within toxicology for the fatal overdoses. That then followed with a cluster or clusters of non-fatal drug poisonings in the areas of the Nyre and Bevan Health Board, starting off in the south of the Health Board area in Newport City, and then spreading up to the north of the area following the drug line that supplies heroin within that locality. Again, with the result of that, local services then proactively promoted WEDINOS and were requesting samples for analysis from individuals. So we did see a localized increase in the number of samples that were coming in to WEDINOS as heroin for analysis, and we did identify a fair proportion of those containing nitazenes. So what we did with that, we again put out a national alert for nitazenes within the heroin market, again providing information to all the stakeholders across Wales and passing the information up to the UK alert system as well. We had a WEDINOS Media Day in the laboratory on the 8th of February, invited several different media outlets there, did a media release, and the main focus of that was around nitazenes. We were providing support to services because obviously the fear of nitazenes and the increased risk of overdose, but also providing information to them that they already had the skill set to be dealing with synthetic opioids from their learnings and experience of dealing with heroin as well. And again, providing reassurance around naloxone. One of the concerns was that would naloxone be as effective for the synthetic opioids, in particular nitazene. There's very limited information and studies done around it, although there is some out there. So we was just providing that reassurance to services. Yes, naloxone works. It's the same action for the synthetic opioids, but you may need to be providing more naloxone than usual. And we provided priority accessibility to testing for WEDINOS for samples via services linked to overdoses so that we could map the geographical spread of nitazenes within the Welsh heroin market as well. In the past 3 months, just to give you some updated information on where we are with nitazenes, we had 36 samples that were profiled as containing a nitazene post-analysis. That was 2.7% of all the submissions analysed by WEDINOS in that time period, which was 1,353. In terms of diazepam, there was 21 submitted as diazepam, but that relates to 6.5% of all the diazepam submissions as well. For heroin, the rate is a little bit higher. We had 13 submitted as heroin. Just over 20% of all our heroin submissions were found to contain nitazenes. And again, going back to what was mentioned earlier, this was in combination with heroin. So this wasn't a direct substitution for nitazenes in replacement of heroin, but in combination with heroin samples as well. One we had as zopiclone and one was submitted as an unknown substance. So we've seen that change in terms of the samples that are coming into WEDINOS since our first nitazene identification, originally starting with tablet form oxycodone, then moving in the summer of 2023 to diazepam, and then increases in samples that were purchased as heroin through that time period. But that's not just where we've seen them. We've seen nitazenes in a far-reaching group of substances as well, albeit in low numbers, and some of these only one single identifications, but we have seen them in a far-reaching group of different substances. Just to stress that with the cannabis and the THC vapes, they were single submissions. The synthetic cannabinoid, MDMB40N, Pinaka, that was 2 submissions that came into the project. But outwith of the general concern of nitazenes and substitution of substances with nitazenes, I think looking at the top left of the screen there, as I mentioned earlier, the real pharmaceutical grade fakes that we are seeing coming out, that sense of safety and security that visual representation offers to individuals who are then unknowingly consuming synthetic opioids is of a real concern, and that's one of the areas that we're currently focusing our resources in Public Health Wales. That's it from me. Thank you very much.
Dean, thank you very much. Very interesting. I'm now going to welcome back Rachel. And we have a few questions in from the audience. We have about 5 minutes, so we'll get through them as quick as we can. First couple of ones, maybe Rachel, a question on the potency of nitazenes versus morphine. The question being, people have heard that they're up to 1,000 times stronger than morphine. And then secondly, linking in there, how addictive are nitazenes?
Okay, and I think if we go back to what I mentioned at the start of my presentation, you know, the analysis and the work that was done in the mid-50s and late 60s, what we can say about it is that some are indeed more potent, but it varies. Some may be less potent. So there's, as I said, it's still an emerging substance category. We're still learning about these substances. They have not been tested in humans, you know, they have not been authorized as medicines. So we can't say specifically per substance, you know, as I said, we're monitoring 16. So what I can say at this moment in time is that they vary in their potency, some being more potent and some being around the same, and maybe some less potent.
Grand, thanks. And around the addiction, does the potency affect the addiction, or is that a separate issue?
I mean, if you look at what I mentioned about the analogy to other opioids like morphine and fentanyl, as I mentioned, that between the years of the 60s to the 2000s, we had seen some sporadic reports regarding eternitazene. But I know that, for example, Alexander Shulgin had warned about the concerns around the potency and addiction regarding these substances. So I think it's a broader question, and as I said, I think that this category is still an emerging, and there's still a lot of unknowns around it.
And thanks, Dean. We have a question that maybe you could answer. Was the shift from the intent to use oxycodone to diazepam an attempt by users to avoid harm, do you think, or do you have any data on that?
Unfortunately, we don't have any data relating to that. I do think that, you know, like I mentioned earlier, because WEDINOS is a self-reporting system, it can't be used as a prevalence, so we wouldn't have a whole picture of that swap over. And also we are aware that if there are pockets of concern, we will see an increase in the number of submissions to WEDINOS relating to that substance as well. So, you know, when we are identifying nitazenes within, for example, oxycodone, we were seeing more oxycodone tablets than normal submitted to the project, and then that's continued then with diazepam and into the heroin market. So we don't have the user data to be able to comment on that, and unfortunately.
And thanks. And just in relation to, you mentioned samples. So one found in the back of a taxi, your first one, which I think is interesting. And then obviously there's the link that some people speculate about the darknet. So is there a link with non-traditional sources such as the darknet, meaning a greater risk of these substances appearing in the community for people to use?
I think it's all about, it's for me, it's accessibility. You know, that you can access these substances from the most rural areas off your mobile phone. You know, so I think accessibility can lead to that as well. And then the way that they're being sold, the way that the samples are being cut into the markets. What we've tended to find normally is where samples are sold on a street level. If there is a cluster of overdoses, whether they be fatal, non-fatal, those reports tend to go back to the dealing chain, and that batch tends to disappear. I don't think you would have that in terms of online markets in the same way. So where in Cardiff, for example, before Christmas, we did see that cluster of overdoses that went on for a period of 2 weeks, and then that batch moved off the market there in that area, but they were from street-based deals. So again, how the online market would respond to acute adverse effects is different to obviously how street level dealers would as well.
Very good. Thanks very much. Right, we're tight for time, so you're getting away very lucky there with no more questions. So thank you both. We're now going to hear from Professor Eamon Keenan. Eamon is the National Clinical Lead for HSE Addiction Services in Ireland and is based in our National Social Inclusion Office. He's a consultant psychiatrist in substance misuse. He's been working in this area since the 80s. He is one of the Irish representatives on the EMCDDA Management Board, and he's on the EU National Drug Coordinators Group. He's also a clinical professor in addiction studies at the Department of Health and Primary Care in Trinity College, Dublin. Eamon, the floor is yours, and you're going to talk to us about the response to the nitazene overdose situation we had in November and December. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Shay, and good afternoon, everybody. I hope that I can start sharing my screen now. Okay, so I hope people can see this. So what I'm going to try and do today is talk you through.
Eamon, apologies, we can't see that yet. Would you like to try again, please, for me?
I will try again.
And there we are, Eamon. Just 2 moments and pop it into presentation mode, please. And thank you. Yes, thanks, Eamon.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the issues that arose in Dublin and Cork before Christmas, and the ongoing issues that we have in relation to the synthetic opioids. But I just wanted to flag the fact that drug use is changing, and the populations who use drugs can no longer be as easily defined as they had been in the past. So we're seeing closing gender gaps as well. We're seeing drug use in the nighttime economy. And in terms of the EMCDDA, they've been saying from recently that drugs can be seen everywhere. Everything with psychoactive potential can be used as a drug, and everyone can be affected either directly or indirectly. So within this changing emerging drug pattern, we've been working for a number of years now to improve our knowledge on the emerging trends. And I just wanted to mention them because this helped inform our response to the nitazenes, synthetic opioids, when they did emerge in November. So we're using a number of different mechanisms to look at emerging drug trends. We're looking at syringe residue analysis from needle exchange programs. We're working with ED departments in relation to presentations. We're looking at wastewater analysis through a European network. We're providing drug checking services at nighttime economy events at festivals. We're conducting web surveys, which are slightly different from the traditional general population surveys. And we've conducted research with cohorts of people who would not generally be involved in the general population surveys, such as those people attending festivals or nighttime economy events. And we've had to use different mechanisms to engage with these populations, social media, dance magazines, and going directly to people who have been attending these events and perhaps using drugs. So this all informed a report that we completed in 2021. which then led to us developing our back-of-house drug monitoring program. So the report then led to a proposal which went into the Department of Health. This required further sign-off and approval by the Department of Justice. And then we had an implementation group of ourselves and Garda Síochána, festival promoters. And I think this was the genesis of the stakeholder collaboration, because we had to link in with emergency service providers. We had to link in with ambulance services. We were linking in with Garda Síochána around the drug testing, which we'd been conducting, first of all, at Electric Picnic in 2022. And one of the things just to note in relation to that is that the traditional methods of communicating with the target audience were changed during this event. We put up messaging on either side of the screen at the big stage at Electric Picnic, and we targeted people who were attending the event with their social media apps that they would have for their tickets. So we're using new methods of engaging with the population, which became important then when we dealt with the nitazene cluster of overdoses in November. So we continued that right throughout 2023 at 3 different festivals, and we're going to go to 5 festivals this year. So that brings us on to the issue that we're looking at now. And one of the problems that we're seeing is that the opium production in Afghanistan has been greatly impacted by the new regime there, the Taliban regime, so much so that in 2023, the production of opium reduced by 95%. Now, Afghanistan is the main main source of heroin globally. It provides about 80% of heroin globally. And this fall off in production of opium is going to have an impact on the heroin market. We may not see it straight away, but it will become apparent with time. And this is why we're having the webinar today, why the attention has been directed towards these synthetic opioids, because there is the indicators that heroin is maybe changing as the most important opioid, and the importance of being prepared for the emergence of these synthetic opioids is key. And so why is this? Well, obviously, in terms of production of heroin, it's quite labor intensive, it's quite time intensive. You have to harvest a crop, you have to prepare it, you have to ship it. But Rachel showed you some of the small factories that they're using to produce the synthetic opioids. And we've seen these 16 nitazene drugs which have emerged since 2019, and 6 of those in 2023. Again, as Rachel has identified, they seem to be coming from China. And somebody's asked questions about potency, and this is an article which was published in the Lancet Public Health last month, which looks at the respective potency of some of the nitazenes compared to traditional heroin. And as you can see, they do vary greatly. And if you look at the eternitazene there, it's up to 500 times the potency of heroin, and much more potent also than fentanyl, which there's been a lot of discussion about. They come in a variety of forms globally, in a variety of different colored powders and in pills, as you've heard from WEDINOS. So in terms of the nitazenes, from our perspective, as Rachel had mentioned, in the EU warning system, about 3/4 of the countries had identified nitazenes. But we did have these outbreaks in France and Ireland in 2023, which were considered slightly different because there were no heroin or natural opioids identified in the samples which were associated with these outbreaks. And I wanted to just talk to you a little bit about the outbreaks that we dealt with and the stakeholder engagement. So on the 9th of November last year, we were first informed of an overdose cluster in Dublin city centre homeless accommodation. We contacted the emergency departments and the National Ambulance Service and the Dublin Fire Brigade. And this was really key because we then had a metric for identifying the numbers of overdoses which were happening. And we were getting information from the ambulance services on a 12-hourly basis. Initially then, yes, they both said that there were a significant number of overdoses presenting, and we issued a risk communication on that Thursday afternoon in relation to high-strength opioid drugs. So to put it into context, in that first 24-hour period, we had 34 overdoses associated by reported by the ambulance services associated with opioid drugs. And on a normal day, in a normal 24-hour period, we would see 3 to 4. So this was a multiple of the regular or normal day. We disseminated that risk communication via all our key stakeholders, both within the HSE addiction services, within the homeless sector, and within our NGO partners. We targeted those individuals who are at risk on the streets with the information, and we did our best to get that information out quickly. We got a sample obtained from an overdose situation from a Garda Síochána, which was transported to Forensic Science Ireland lab for analysis. We continued then on the Friday, the 10th, to see overdoses. The risk communications were circulated, but by Friday afternoon, late Friday afternoon, early Friday evening, we had identified the presence of nitazenes in the sample that had been obtained by a Garda Síochána. And this allowed us then to sort of elevate our risk level to a red alert, which we issued throughout the city, targeting those people in particular who would be at most risk. And to help with that targeting, some of the learning that we had from the electric picnic event around messaging up on screens is that we contacted Dublin City Council, who were very happy to be able to work with us to post up the overdose warning signs on the electronic traffic signals and signs right throughout the city. And this had a real impact because people who are using drugs on the streets are not necessarily watching the 9 o'clock news, but they will see these signs. We identified then a second sample through our lab in the National Drug Treatment Centre and our colleagues in Trinity College. And the targeted information went out in relation to the substance. The confirmatory analysis showed that it was N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene. And that collaborative stakeholder response led to a situation by Sunday evening, in that 12-hour period, we had no overdoses. Overall, we had 57 overdoses associated with that cluster. We then, about 3 weeks later, had a similar situation in Cork. This involved 20 overdoses. It also involved N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene, and once again, stakeholders collaborated to get information out to the at-risk population very effectively. We had the picture of the protonitazene, N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene, as a comparison to heroin. We put that out in our red alert, and I think the laboratory was able to tell us that this was actually the same batch that had been used in Dublin and seemed to have been transported down. So to our minds, it was like the drug dealers were sort of testing the market by introducing these synthetic opioids. So we've had an ongoing response since then. We need to maintain the awareness for services and service users. We've established a national red alert group, which is chaired by our office. We're looking for any unusual clusters, and we want to be able to respond quickly with public health advice. On the group, we have the ambulance services, we have the laboratories, we have Garda Síochána, we have the ED hospital networks, and we have the HSE communications division, which is really important around appropriate messaging. We've advised all local areas, and Nikki's going to go into this a little bit more detail, to establish stakeholder groups and follow the guidelines. And to highlight the ongoing issue, in January of 2024, there was a significant police seizure of protonitazene in Dublin City. So this was the second nitazene identified in Ireland, and we were able to issue an additional drug warning on the 2nd of February. So today, one of the things we wanted to do was to use the opportunity to launch our new fact sheet for medical care providers. This has been approved by the National Red Alert Group and launched today. So it's informing medical colleagues in relation to nitazenes and to signpost them to resources. We're encouraging people to monitor and report nitazenes in clinical settings, and we're advising on the importance of sample collection and laboratory advice. We give information around the management of overdose, and really this is a live document. This is dated February 2024, and as further information comes available, we will update and keep circulating this document. It's available on our drugs.ie website under fact sheets. Naloxone has been mentioned. Naloxone is a huge priority for our service, for our office. During 2023, we distributed 6,500 preparations of naloxone, and we trained over 2,000 individuals. We're currently working with Garda Síochána in relation to training and carrying of naloxone. And we've developed a peer-to-peer overdose prevention program, the Circle program, which is rolling out this year. The initial advice we're getting is that it might require extra doses of naloxone, but that's not exactly clear yet. What we do know is that naloxone is effective in responding, in reversing the overdose effect associated with nitazenes, as it is effective with heroin. And so we can be very clear about that. So in terms of our own situation, in terms of preparing, it's really important that we get information to inform our public health responses. So this requires analytical capabilities and investment in personnel and in equipment. We need to have appropriate processes for reporting, and that's why we have our National Red Alert Group. We need to have clear procedures and roles, and the communication to the at-risk groups really has to be accurate and prompt. So this requires ongoing engagement with law enforcement, laboratory networks, poison centres, public health, care systems, and voluntary and community agencies. So at the minute, while we may not be seeing a major change in the opioid market, it is advisable to scale up treatment services and overdose responses, and that will require investment. Stakeholder engagement is essential now to prepare and plan, and we need to prioritise a dedicated early warning system. So as the EU early warning system is saying, countries may need to develop and review plans now to prepare for and respond to a possible increase in nitazene availability and harms. Thank you.
Eamon, thank you very much. Interesting and informative as always. We're now going to hand over to Sinéad McNamara. Sinéad is a senior biochemist in the HSE National Drug Treatment Centre Laboratory with over 20 years experience in forensic toxicology, specialising in the analysis of urine for drugs using LCMS and GCMS. For the last 10 years, she's been working on development and updating of methods for the detection of new psychoactive substances in urine to enable trend monitoring of drug use in the addiction population and related research. Her recent work has included carrying out testing for the Escape Syringe Analysis Project and drug checking at festivals as part of the HSE's Safer Nightlife programme. Sinéad, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Shay, and good afternoon, everybody. Yeah, I work in the National Drug Treatment Centre, and I'm just going to go through how we identified the nitazene. So I'm going to talk about which laboratories were involved, what kind of timeline there was, and the techniques that we used for identification. So we had 5 laboratories, Forensic Science Ireland, who are involved in the analysis of drug seizures, the HSE National Drug Treatment Centre Laboratory, where I work, which usually do urine testing for the opiate substitution population, but also involved in drug monitoring and the festival testing. The State Laboratory, who do post-mortem toxicology work, and Trinity College Dublin, 2 departments, Department of Pharmacology and Therapeutics and the Department of Chemistry. So we talked about nitazenes a bit. This is the core structure of a nitazene. You can see there are groups can be added to alter the structure of the compound. The 2-benzimidazole opioids were first developed in the 1950s. They weren't marketed because they were too unsafe. And N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene, which is the one that we found, is a relatively new addition to this subclass and bears structural resemblance to both protonitazene and N-Pyrrolidino etonitazene. And it is not currently controlled under the Irish Misuse of Drugs Act. So this is just basically a summary of the timeline, and I'm going to go through this in a bit more detail on the various techniques. So as Professor Keenan was mentioning, that we first started getting phone calls on the Thursday morning saying that there was an increase in overdoses. So quick messages out to all the different stakeholders to try and get our hands on the substance that was causing the problems. So on the Friday morning, Garda Síochána got a suspected powder and sent it to Forensic Science Ireland, who analysed it by GCMS. And by that evening, Forensic Science Ireland were happy to say that it was a nitazene, but not which type it was. On the Saturday morning, we got a further sample sent to the laboratory in the National Drug Treatment Centre, and we analysed it there by 2 techniques, FDIR and LCMS. And we also sent a sample to Trinity College Dublin for some GCMS analysis that day. So by that evening, we knew that it was one of two nitazenes, isomers of each other. So we couldn't tell which one it was, so we had to bring it for further analysis. And the only way for us to tell which one it was to send it to Trinity College Dublin, which is across the road here from us in the National Drug Treatment Centre. We're in the city centre. So I went over to Dr. John O'Brien there and gave the sample in to him for analysis. And by that evening, Monday, we were able to tell Professor Keenan that it was actually N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene. So we used 5 different analytical techniques, GCMS in both Forensic Science Ireland and Trinity College Dublin. In the National Drug Treatment Centre, we used LCMS and FTIR, and in TCD, we used NMR. Then in the State Laboratory, we used high-resolution liquid chromatography mass spectrometry. So what is GCMS? It's gas chromatography mass spectrometry. It provides information based on molecular weight determination and fragmentation patterns. It produces a mass spectrum, so this is kind of like a fingerprint, which can be searched against a library of known spectra. It's very good at identifying unknown substances. There's some sample preparation required, and it is a destructive technique. So after the GCMS analysis in both FSI and TCD, as I was saying, we knew it was a nitazene, but we didn't know which one it was. We knew it was one of two isomers, N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene or N-Pyrrolidino isotonitazene. So you can see there from the structures where it's circled in red, that was the differences between the two. So they have exactly the same mass spectrum. So we couldn't distinguish them from each other on the GCMS. There was paracetamol and caffeine also seen in the samples. None of the laboratories had drug standards to help us determine which one it was. And we didn't know if they were chromatographically separated. Liquid chromatography mass spectrometry in National Drug Treatment Centre, that was on the Saturday. We performed analysis with this technique. Similarly to GCMS, it provides information based on molecular weight and fragmentation patterns. It's not particularly good for unknowns, and the way we use it, which is in an MRM mode, while it's more sensitive than GCMS, it's targeted analysis, meaning we're looking for a specific number of compounds. So if it's not what you're looking for, you won't see it. There is some sample preparation required, and it's a destructive technique. So when we did look at it on our LCMS, the method at the time only looked for N9 nitazenes, which are all listed there. The thing to note is that our method did not have N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene, which is what we found. We did see some unusual peaks when we analysed it, raising concerns that it was a nitazene because it had similar fragments to another nitazene, protonitazene. In the National Drug Treatment Centre, we also have an FTIR, which is Fourier transform infrared spectroscopy. That's a picture of the machine there. This is what we use for our festival testing. It's very rapid analysis and it's portable. You get a result back in less than a minute. It is good for unknowns. Unfortunately, it has limited sensitivity, but it's a non-destructive technique, meaning that you can recover the sample. When we did look at it on the FTIR, we found one substance, which was mannitol. So this is a sugar that is often used as a cutting agent. So we knew then that the majority of the powder was actually mannitol. So then on the Monday, because we were stuck, we didn't know which of the isomers was, I ran over to Trinity and gave it to Dr. John O'Brien, and he performed NMR on it, which is nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. This provides very detailed structural information of the compound. You need an NMR expert to interpret the results. It's not widely available because it's so expensive, so you generally only see NMRs in the likes of universities. It wouldn't be available in very many laboratories around Ireland. So the NMR told us that it was N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene and not N-Pyrrolidino isotonitazene. So subsequently, there were a number of patients in the Mater Hospital who had overdosed, and we got some blood samples. And in the State Laboratory, we formed high-resolution liquid chromatography mass spectrometry on those samples. So this provides a precise mass measurements allowing for the accurate determination of the molecular weight of ions. It's a very complex process. There's a lot of information gathered, so it takes a lot longer to go through and interpret the results. It's a destructive technique, and there is some sample preparation required. So the results of those 10 blood samples we got a couple of weeks after the overdoses, and all 10 samples contained N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene. So I think the outcome of this was that it was a rapid multi-agency collaborative response. We had 3 government labs and 2 academic labs. And Garda were very helpful in getting the samples to us in a timely manner. They were running around all over Dublin to get the samples to each of the different laboratories. The process highlighted the strengths and the weaknesses of the technique used for forensic analysis, drug analysis. And combining the resources and the knowledge of the various laboratories was critical in getting the result out quickly. We made the identification over 4 days, and it was the first identification in the country for N-Pyrrolidino protonitazene. So we reported that to the European database on new drugs. I'd just like to thank Dr. Sarah Killorn, Rodney Lakes and Friends in Ireland, who got that first result that it was a nitazenes on Friday evening very quickly. Mairead Webster in State Laboratory, who performed the blood analysis of the patient samples. The HSE National Drug Treatment Centre staff who opened up on the Saturday to allow us in to do some analysis. Dr. Adrian Moody in the Mater Hospital, who got the blood samples to the State Laboratory. Dr. Pierce Kavanagh in Trinity College, who did the GCMS analysis, and Dr. John O'Brien, who did the NMR analysis, and Detective Superintendent Shane McCormack and all the staff members of the Garda Síochána who got the samples to all the laboratories so quickly. Thanks very much for your attention.
Sinead, thank you very much. As always, very educational and informative. It's great to have such experts here in the house today. Now going for our last presenter, our last expert of the day, Nikki Killeen. Nikki is a project manager on the Emerging Drug Trend project in the HSE. She holds an undergraduate degree in social science and a master's degree in addiction studies, has worked for a number of years on development of novel harm reduction projects. She coordinates a number of projects to monitor and respond to drug market changes, such as the HSE Safer Nightlife Programme, the development of a formal early warning system, and the recent coordination of the national response to nitazenes outbreaks. Nikki, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Shay. First of all, thank you so much as well to our guests. We very much look towards the early warning system by the EMCDDA and WEDINOS to monitor the situation, and their work has always greatly informed what we do here. And I'd also like to thank Shay for chairing today, and to echo my colleagues who highlighted the important role that Garda Síochána played in our recent outbreaks. My presentation today is going to be far less scientific, and it's going to be looking at some of the practical elements that we need to consider in our preparations. So we have heard today that we do foresee future occurrences. We are concerned, and I suppose I really want to speak to frontline workers, I suppose, to reinforce and remind the important role that you have, not only in responding, but to monitor and report. As Eamon highlighted, initially, the initial outbreak in Dublin in November was detected very quickly by people in frontline services. So I just want to highlight today some of our work and how we're looking at preparing in collaboration with services and areas moving forward. So just, I know Eamon provided some context in terms of our work and the work that we have been doing in the lead up to the outbreak. There has been monitoring in the background, I suppose, through our HSE projects. We have been trying to look at new sources. We did identify gaps in our monitoring, and some of those areas were highlighted by Eamon. Just in the regular flow of day-to-day activities of work in our office, we are in constant communication with a range of stakeholders, and we're looking at a range of trends. So I just wanted to start off by highlighting that in terms of the stakeholder networks, and to just reinforce how important it is for all of us to remain in communication moving forward. The more awareness we have, the better plans we have to be prepared. If we have emergency responses in place should we need them, we are going to reduce harm, and we did see that from our initial response to the first outbreaks. In terms of our work in general, there's not always a need for an alert. Sometimes situations can be isolated or localized. Sometimes we need to just provide information to service networks or to people who use drugs. And we've been doing that for some time with some other trends, such as synthetic cannabinoids and new tablets, which have been found on the market. So just to kind of highlight, when you are communicating with your frontline service users, we try to limit the amount of red alerts that are issued in Ireland, and when they are issued, they need to be taken extremely serious. They will only be issued when we do think there is a very serious threat for life. Just some lessons, I suppose, we've seen, I suppose, that we do need to be prepared. We've seen, you know, from Eamon how we moved through the first outbreaks, but just some takeaway messages. Frontline service providers and the people that are here today, your roles are extremely essential. You will be the first people who may notice a signal of change, and it is extremely important for you to know when to report or how to report. Overall, what we are seeing is that overdoses will be noticeably different. They'll be difficult, more complex to manage, and they may need extra doses of naloxone. And I know we've had some questions in on that. The anecdotal information that you get is really important, and I want to highlight that you know, the anecdotal information may not always be the alert, but if it's sent to me, and as it was through the previous alerts, I can map and monitor, I suppose, and put a framework on the anecdotal information to see what is valuable and what we need. And we did use a lot of anecdotal information from frontline service providers in our outbreak response. These can be really unexpected. Look, they always seem to happen when we least expect it, you know, Friday evening of a bank holiday weekend. So we need to have those plans in place, because these can hit very sudden. And what we saw with the first Dublin outbreak, they move fast. The batches move extremely fast. So having our speed of mobilization is essential. Our naloxone, our preparation plans there, we can't exactly measure it, but we know naloxone undoubtedly saved lives through the outbreaks. So having those kind of preparation plans in place. We now know as well that the risk communications can be extremely effective. They can deter people from wanting to access that batch. Some people may seek that batch, but we know that they can then move to different markets. So we saw the movement from Dublin to Cork, and usually the progress would be the next big city. So cities need to be prepared if other cities are responding. In terms of our preparation plans, just to highlight, we issued national preparation guidelines in December, very quickly after the first outbreaks. There's key headings there. These are shared with CHO managers, and what we asked was that people looked at establishing local networks. So whether that was establishing their own groups with a health lead and deciding what each area would have as their plans to feed into the National Red Alert group that Eamon chairs. I'm just going to highlight some key points today. While they're all extremely important in terms of beginning your harm reduction preparation, beginning your rollout and expansion of naloxone, ensuring you've adequate doses in your service, offering treatment as a harm reduction tool, I'm going to look at specifically what you need to look at in terms of monitoring, emergency planning, and really working with people who use drugs as part of your preparation plans. So in terms of our interim guidelines, we appreciate that services are working extremely hard on the ground, and these cases are complex, but we must not miss the important data that can not only help us, but our European colleagues in piecing together more information that's required to know how we respond and adapt to these drugs. So overall, we're asking services, whether that's through local groups which have been established or reporting directly to me, it's fine either way. We really want to know if you pick up any signals of change in terms of new products, if people think synthetic opiates are for sale, if there's stronger batches, or if there's just general concern. So looking towards those light powders, but also concern for tablets and other products. Not every situation may be nitazenes. We have looked at a few recently which have not been nitazenes, but we need to investigate it. We need to look at it. It's easier to respond the sooner we get the information. It's very difficult if we receive the information a few weeks later. In terms of your overdoses of concern, we need to know this as soon as possible if there's a sudden increase of overdose cases in your service that you are concerned about. So each service is different, each area is different, and you will know within your service. And it's time now to look at what is normal, what's normal activity within your service, so you can monitor what may be a peak, and then you can trigger a signal to start a review on that. So we've put out general guidance of 3 to 5 overdoses in your service on the same day. That could vary. The figures could vary from service to service, but start thinking what is normal and what isn't normal. And again, it could be one isolated case. You could have a client who has an extremely high tolerance and could have had a very complex overdose with a lot of naloxone needed. So they're really important things that need to be reported straight away to ourselves, so we can trigger a review to see if there's any similarities in your city, area or region. So it's just really important to think of the quickness and maybe some things that you may otherwise overlook, to start thinking about how you'd report them. Obviously, if there's a sudden death or deaths that you think may be of interest in your service, it's important to report on these too. As part of your role as well, directly working with people, you have access, or to substances that we could analyze. So if the substance isn't available, and I appreciate it's not always, please do look at the syringes from the overdose cases. Any cookers that may be left over, or baggies. So we are able to bring these to the lab and see if they're able to analyze. Just an important point on the syringes, obviously practicing everything that needs to be done in terms of safer transportation, but the bin that the syringe is in needs to be able to open. So the independent boxes you give clients cannot be reopened, but also please don't put the syringe in a bin with other needles, because it's very hard to find it and there could be cross-contamination. Biological samples are obviously very useful from a hospital setting, but the review of this can take some time. So we're looking for the syringe or the substance itself. Obviously, in terms of the movement of substance, this has to be done with the support of the clinical lead, which is Eamon, and the Garda. So we're working on protocols for that. Just looking at our preparation, and I really just want people to think about getting ready for this and what we need to do. Please do consult your local service users and the people you are engaging with who use drugs. We need to know what they think of the situation, how they perceived the previous alerts, and how you'll reach them. So as I said, this isn't always on a Monday when a service is open. How do we reach people if it's a Friday evening of a bank holiday? Ask your service users what other services they might be engaged in. Where do they see information? Would it be a shop window? Would it be their hostel? Look at that plan and have that in place. Also, what types of resources people want. Do they want posters? Do they want leaflets? Or do they want them in their health interventions? We need to figure all this out now, so we're prepared for when it does happen. Review the harms with them. How do they perceive the harms? And I think just one take-home message as well is try to avoid creating stigma if people do actively seek nitazenes. I think we saw this in the past with cathinones known as snowblow, that some people weren't disclosing use because use became a little bit stigmatized. We don't want to create that. We want people who are using any drugs to still engage with us and don't create any existing barriers. I suppose moving forward, we need to look at the behavior change and how our messaging will work. We are looking for ethics ourselves at the moment. We have a request in to review risk communications and behavior change based on the outbreak of nitazenes and our responses. So we should have that at a later date. On risk communications, we have to get it right in terms of the messaging. We have to develop trust, and we have to ensure that when we need to issue a very serious alert, that it is taken seriously. So in terms of the narrative, there was increased fentanyl narrative in the media in the lead up to this. We found this quite concerning for a number of reasons. I suppose, yes, fentanyl and nitazenes are both synthetic opiates. Our concerns were that if people believed fentanyl was in circulation and they were consuming it when they weren't, they believed their tolerance may have been higher. So the message of a new drug in circulation may have been diluted. What was also missing from the fentanyl narrative was there was no information on how it was appearing, who is at risk, were other user groups at risk, what did it look like? And importantly, it wasn't directing people on what they should do at that point in time. So really great risk communication should have all of this information: who, where, and what to do. What are we recommending? We need to recommend what we can for people in this situation and help them reduce harm. So in terms of our harm reduction interventions, it's really important now to continue to say that this is a risk. While we know it's only Dublin and Cork, other areas need to be prepared. We need to change, I suppose, our harm reduction in a sense that smoking no longer carries less risk. We're seeing both situations leading to cases of overdose. We know that the batches look different. We know that it burns differently. So connect with us for what information you feel you might need to help people at that time. We're trying to be really transparent. We are sharing information on drug study. We're letting people know as much as we can. Eamon has already recovered, and so has Rachel, in terms of what we need to do. I would just encourage people to use our existing networks and to start that practical work on the ground should this appear in your area. My last slide, I've probably gone a little bit over time, but I just want to highlight that there are other areas we still do need to think of. We need to look at new psychoactive substances and tablets. That market's ever changing. Synthetic in the festival setting, impacting that user group. So that's it for me. Thank you so much.
Well, Nikki, thank you very much. Another informative educational presentation. I'm now going to welcome all the presenters back. And I have a number of questions which we've received from the audience in no particular order. We're going to stay on for about 10 minutes, hopefully, and we get through some of them. I'm going to start with a question we got early on around nitazene test strips and whether they are of use or suitable or usable in the context of people readily identifying what they have. Are they any use? I don't know which one wants to take that, Sinéad, Eamon.
Yeah, I'll take that, Shay. So we've done some limited testing here of the test strips. The good news is that the nitazene that we had caused a positive on it, but we did have a number of false positives running regular heroin samples on it. The manufacturers of the kits list 4 nitazenes that they say cause a positive, and they also list 1 that does not cause a positive. So they've done very limited testing on a lot of the nitazenes out there. They also have done very need further testing. And they also, one thing is that unlike a COVID test or a pregnancy test, it is 1 line for positive as opposed to 2 lines. There's also, you need to be quite precise when you're putting your sample. So you get 5 to 10 milligrams of a sample and put it in 5 mils of water and then put in your test strip. So I do think they need further testing. I wouldn't be totally happy with them just yet.
Grand job. Thanks. Sinead, one other question. Is the analytical data for the new psychoactive substances available to forensics labs and or early warning systems outside the EU, particularly in the post-Brexit scenario?
Thanks, Shay. Yeah, I mean, I illustrated earlier the EDND, the European Database of New Drugs, and that's where we host most of our analytical data that we receive on these detections. And while I mentioned that system is restricted access to the members of early warning system networks across Europe, we also do cooperate internationally. You know, we need to understand the global situation as well and how that impacts and what we can learn from that. So we do have collaborations outside of the EU. What I would say is that, of course, we are approachable. We on an ad hoc basis, we can share analytical information that will support the identification of that substance or other substances in other regions. So we can have a discussion around that.
So, Eamon, just before you come in there, if some agency or nationality wants the information, I can give out your number, Rach.
You can give my email address, sure.
Eamon, you wanted to come in there.
Well, just to say, I suppose, in relation to the British Irish Council, that they do have regular meetings of all the UK and Irish directorates, and one of the areas they do cover is drugs. So there has been ongoing communication between ourselves, Northern Ireland, Scotland, England and Wales, and also Jersey and Guernsey in relation to these nitazenes and sharing of information around what's been happening. And I mean, that's one of the reasons it's great to have Dean here today. But that sharing of information is going on within the islands, if you like.
Fine job. Thanks very much, Eamon and Rachel. We had a number of questions on the subject of naloxone. So either Nikki or Eamon, the questions would be about naloxone availability for volunteers, data on naloxone administration, any average number of naloxone doses required, what's the position with training, and where might it be readily accessible if somebody needs it, and what the position would be around that.
Okay, well, look, I'll take that. I mean, there's a lot of questions there, but naloxone is a priority for the addiction services, the HSE addiction services, and we had the legislation amended last year to allow the HSE to be a listed organisation in terms of the provision of training around naloxone. So we have a blended training approach. We have a module up on HSE land, module 1, and then we do an in-person, face-to-face training. Individuals need to be CPR trained to avail of our training. But as I say, we've rolled training out to over 2,000 people last year. Since we've put in place the HSE land module, we've had 188 people register for training in the last month. And because we're now a listed organisation in terms of the provision of training, if an organisation gets training from us, then they can be provided with naloxone to be able to administer once the individuals are trained. So the advice would be look at our information on drugs.ie, contact your local HSE addiction services, and training is available widely. The peer-to-peer training circle module, we've got 128 peers who've now been trained. They're going to be active for the next 6 months. We're going to evaluate that training and then we'll roll it out further if the evaluation proves to be successful. So we've trained organisations, we've trained peers, we've trained family members, we've trained individuals, and we're very committed to the training around naloxone. It is a key element in the response around synthetic opioids. Just to say the actual doses of naloxone required, it's not exactly clear yet. It does appear that you require additional doses of naloxone to be able to revive someone, but not in all cases. So we've seen people responding after nitazene overdoses, and we know there have been nitazene overdoses with 2 to 3 doses of naloxone, which would be sort of similar to what we would see as with the heroin. What we are seeing with the overdoses with nitazenes is a slightly different pattern, in that somebody who takes the nitazenes and is overdosing collapses quite quickly and falls down, as opposed to drifting into an overdose situation. So that's one of the things that we're telling services about, to be wary in terms of if somebody sort of collapses almost straight away after taking their drugs, you know, that's a potential indicator that it might be nitazenes. But naloxone does work for nitazenes, so we're committed to putting it out there.
Another question around some of the legal barriers. Is there any particular issue in how we respond, given that nitazenes are not controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act, but would rather come under the New Psychoactive Substances?
And you, as the legal representative here on the panel, don't want to take that one, no?
Well, I'll take it from the point of view of this being health-led, that yes, they're still illegal, albeit under a different format. But in terms of the health response, no, we're here to respond from a health point of view. So you treat the person first, and the Garda's mission statement is keeping people safe. So the administration of health relieving matters is I think would fall under keeping people safe, and we'll worry about the legalities as a secondary concern.
Yeah, no, I think that's the whole thrust of our work over the last number of years has been to keep people safe, and we've been working very closely in collaboration with the Garda Síochána around that. And the work that we've been conducting at festivals is a clear indication of that collaborative approach that has led to the identification of a number of risky substances. It allows us to issue risk communications in conjunction with the guards and in conjunction with the festival promoters. So that's a real clear example of how we can work together within a stakeholder collaborative framework.
And Dean, I'm going to throw this one at you. if only because Wales is slightly more east and closer to Afghanistan and the supply routes than Ireland is, if only by about 30 miles across the sea. When do we think, or do we think, that Europe will be impacted by supply issues as a result of the Taliban ban?
From speaking to colleagues in UK police forces, I think we're looking at about the next 12 to 18 months, really with it. But that's dependent on current stocks and stock levels, and transport routes coming through. So yeah, at the moment for us in Wales, when we are seeing heroin and heroin samples, our market remains quite stable for us at the moment. But you know, seeing these substitutions with nitazenes is showing that there's something already happening in that sense.
Grand job, thanks. One quick one, and I think I can answer it. Is there any evidence of cocaine being cut with nitazenes? And I think the answer is no, if we're correct there, yes. We haven't come across that. Correct, because cocaine sends you up and the nitazene sends you down, so it's a curious combination. One question on biological sample concentrations. Are the concentrations in the biological samples known in relation to nitazene intoxications? Are we testing for that? Can we test for that?
I'll take that, Shay. There's actually not very much known about the concentrations in samples at the moment. I do know a lot of them are sub-nanogram levels, so difficult to detect depending on your instrumentation. The levels that cause deaths and stuff, there's very little information on that as well. But at the moment, for instance, in our laboratory, we can't currently test for nitazenes in biological samples. We can in drug substances and syringes, but in biological samples, our machine that we have here is not dense enough. I think a lot of labs will struggle to detect them.
Very good. We've talked about the back of house testing procedures that we have. And there's questions around, what are the barriers to getting widely accessible and permanent testing service? And then secondly, but I think we'll throw this one as well, is there any links with the prison service, and is the Irish prison service linked into the naloxone treatment? Eamon, if you want to take a run at those.
The barriers, I mean, obviously there's issues in relation to possession of drugs. Still, it is illegal to be in possession of drugs, and using a fixed site laboratory for analysis of a fixed site location might have some legislative impacts. I think we're exploring options in relation to that. I think the addition of a fixed site lab would be of benefit for us to be able to identify substances that are on the market. But there is clearly issues under the Misuse of Drugs Act that would require examination. In relation to the prisons, yes, we worked closely with the prisons around naloxone. Last year, we launched an initiative whereby people who were released from prison were provided with naloxone training and product. So the prison service sit on the early warning emerging trend subgroup that's shared by the Department of Health. So they have an input in that regard, and we would have regular contact with the Irish Prison Service, even beyond that initiative that we developed last year.
Grand job, thanks. I have one question just popped in there. Any samples of ketamine being cut with nitazenes? The answer is no to that. We haven't come across that either. Let me see. The consideration for regular public testing, that's just been addressed there. No, I think that's about it, other than some very, very scientific questions which people can answer in a private area. So I'm going to draw proceedings to a halt here. I want to thank you all. I want to thank the 400 plus people who attended. I want to thank the excellent presenters in Sinéad, Eamon, Nikki, Rachel, and Dean. Thank you for your expertise and your knowledge. Thank you for including on Garda Síochána. I think we've worked well together, and I look forward to working well with you all in the future. Thank you to the organisers in the background, Lauren and Quiva, and thank you all.